Hello and welcome to another Tyrrell's Classic Workshop. It's an old faithful this time round. Why do I use that expression? Well, it is an old faithful. It's now a 40-year-old car, this. No, 50-year-old car. Half a century old. Incredible, really. The reason I mention that particular expression is I was judging at the London Concours last weekend. Last weekend. It was a fantastic event, some wonderful cars there. I ended up judging the Ferrari V8 category, right the way through from the Dino 308 GT4, the model that came out 2 years before this, right up to the very latest Ferraris, actually. And there were a lovely couple there. I'm not going to give too much away, but they've been in the extremely fortunate position to have a new Ferrari every year for the last 24 years. And they've constantly upgraded and updated. And they weren't in the first flush of youth, this couple, so for them to be able to get in and out of the car is quite an achievement in modern supercars. But they had a model of Ferrari that they've had for 6 years. They had it delivered to them new 6 years ago, and they haven't parted with this car. Completely against their normal habit, and they have come to call this car, this 6-year-old Ferrari, their Old Faithful. Go figure, another world, but a delightful expression to apply to a 6-year-old Ferrari. I can't think there are too many people in the world that would do that, but hey, that's the joy of Concours judging. You never know. Meeting the owners of the cars and hearing their stories is actually very much a part of it, as well as the car itself. So yeah, but this is an Old Faithful. It's been owned for many years by its owner. He has a collection of cars. We've done a lot of work on this car. It is one of the first 308 GTBs, as they were called. Brief recap: the Dino 308 GT4 came out in 1973. It was Enzo Ferrari decided to, for reasons best known to himself, to give the job of styling it to Bertone. The wonderful Marcello Gandini was given the job of designing it, the 308 GT4, and design it he did. But it used a revolutionary, at the time for Ferrari in production terms, V8 engine, all alloy with cast iron liners, V8 engine, the F106. It was the first Ferrari. Was it? No. Just around about one of the first to use either that or the 365 Boxer to use belts to drive the camshafts. Marcello Gandini did the styling. It was what was called a cab-forward design. So the driver's seat in relation to, for example, the scuttle and the front wheels, whereas it's there on this one, it was about there on the 308 GT4. It was at least a foot further forward towards the front of the car to allow room for rear seat passengers. And that meant that on the 308 GT4, your legs were scrunched up into a very narrow footwell because of the front wheel arch intruding into the body. So it was a question of compromise, of shuffling the different positions. And apparently Enzo Ferrari pained over this situation and deliberated and considered it quite a lot, had various mock-ups made as to where the 308 GT4 layout would be, because he wanted a 2+2 Ferrari. That was the whole point. The 308 GT4, still not called a Ferrari when it was launched in 1973, was, as I say, it was the first one with the V8 engine, the 3-litre initially V8 engine. And the funny thing is that it was the one and only time that Bertone were allowed to design, were approached by Enzo Ferrari to design a Ferrari. We don't know why. They got approached by him. In a clever piece of styling, Marcello Gandini took the Lamborghini Huracan body that he styled in 1970, and he changed the outer skins to make the Dino 308 GT4, and it was a very angular and wedge-shaped design, lots of straight edges, as the Huracan was, but the outside of the car, he made the creases on the body panels, altered slightly the shape of the windows and the air intakes and things like that. And actually it ended up being quite a visually different car. This is the cleverness of styling. And that came out in 1973. As I say, it was a 2+2 with a mid-mounted V8 engine. Not an easy concept to do that because of the space issue. But then in 1975, things got turned on their head when this car was announced, the 308 GTB. By this time, the Dino series of cars, the 206, then the 246, then the 308 GT4, and then this, were all, up until this time, were all called Dino. Enzo Ferrari still had not taken the plunge to call them Ferraris, but with this one he did. So this is various generations down the line from the original Dino 206, and this actually was called a Ferrari 308 GTB, Gran Turismo Berlinetta. GT4 being 4 seats or 4 cams, depending on who you talk to. But this was completely different. Enzo Ferrari, the reception of the 308 GT4, with hindsight, it's a wonderful car. At the time, it had a lukewarm reception from the press and from buyers alike. People bought it, particularly if they had young kids, because they could enjoy themselves driving a mid-engine Ferrari, but their young family could also come along for the ride as well. Presumably not get too car sick in the back of a 308 GT4, but best move on. And then they came out, Pininfarina had the freedom to go back to the original Dino concept without the blockage of having to find space for 2 seats in the middle. So this is always was a 2-seater car, which meant the packaging has reset back to the original packaging with 2 seats, the bulkhead for the engine there, lots of space for the pedal box and for the feet here on right and left-hand drive cars. All the same as the original 246 or 206 Dino concept. And in fact, this car under the skin is very similar to a Dino 246 GT or GTS. And why not? It has the twin rail chassis, which is sort of 1950s-esque type thing. That's what Ferrari were using on the 250 GTs. It's got tried and tested double wishbone suspension all round. And Pininfarina really did pull the blinder with this, because the styling, because they were allowed to get things in proper proportion from stem to stern, they could actually do a beautiful job of styling this car. And it actually stayed in production, this car, for 14 years, which is a long time for a Ferrari, actually. And why? Because the styling was right first time. It had the proven V8 engine from the 308 GT4. It was, as I say, it was a light car. One thing I haven't mentioned yet, and now seems as good a time as any, is the fact that this is being one of the first 308 GTBs, is a fiberglass bodied car, vetroresina in Italian. And so the whole front end, all this front clip, everything on the car is fiberglass, all the outer skins, apart from this A-post area here, right up to that join, and only the fiberglass cars have that join on them. So that's an easy way to identify a fiberglass or later steel 308 GTB series. But this is just a very, they did get right first time. Nobody complained about the styling when this came out, and quite rightly, because it was absolutely, they hit the bullseye first time, Pininfarina, with this. It was designed by Leonardo Fioravanti, who designed the Daytona, and just it combines a sensuality with purpose. It really is, I wouldn't like to say it's slightly effeminate, the styling, but it is very pretty. Obviously the later 288 GTO is a wonderful looking car, actually based on this car. We've done a lot of work on this car 2 or 3 years ago. The owner's had it back. He's enjoyed driving the car. He is, I can say, he's delighted with the job. But we had to do major surgery on this car. Fiberglass cars, people think, oh great, no rust problems. Absolutely not. These can rust just as badly as any other Ferrari or car of the 1960s and 70s. But look at this.
Well, this is where we first got a hint of the problem, around the screen it started to bubble, because this little piece here is steel, everything else on the outside is fiberglass.
Yep.
So by the time we saw this bubbling away here, inside in the structure of the car there was already extensive rust. It was quite serious. So we've taken off the fiberglass, the body, the front end anyway. All these sections here, which are where the quite heavy headlights mounts and motors sits, this was all rotten.
Don't be fooled by the fiberglass outer skin. It's under the surface, as I say, you have that steel chassis, and particularly in this area, this is a critical area, the A-post, the junction of the front end, the front suspension, etc. You've got all sorts of what's called a bending moment, trying to push the front up and this bit down in the chassis. And what happens is the rust in extremis, the chassis can actually disappear effectively here, and you're just left with the very, very basic body to hold the whole thing together. And this car, when we actually ended up taking the whole front clip off, because some of the framework around the headlamp supports, the motor supports, we could tell by looking at it from outside through the vents, was pretty ropey. We took the front end off, and then horror of horrors, the chassis was almost rusted through completely. We've got some video footage from previous videos to show that as a work in progress. Pretty scary. We did have a GT4, the earlier car, in a few years ago, and that was the same. The chassis had rusted away in this area where you get all the mud splattering up underneath, beautifully eating away at that Italian metal. And it was also terribly grim, actually. It really was. Major structural issues. Ryan at Cheshire Prestige Paintworks has done his usual superb job of painting this car. Because it's fiberglass, it has to be, the baking process for the paint has to be observed differently to a steel car. There is a limit to how far they can take the temperature of the oven up. It's about 50 degrees C is your limit, as opposed to more than that. We particularly think of the Lamborghini LM002. Whenever we restore one of those, it's got huge flat areas on the doors, massive mirrors, which basically you can look at and see any imperfections on because they're flat. There's no curve to disguise anything. And on the LM002, we have to be particularly careful because the door outers are composite material, a fiberglass fiber type material. If you take them above 50 degrees C in the oven, they start to warp and move. So what am I saying here? The bodywork on this car, the substrate, is amazingly straight and ripple free. It really is. It looks like a steel 308 GTB in fantastic condition. And that's because Ryan observed the correct curing procedure around fiberglass cars. These things are very important. They're hard won, this sort of knowledge. Unfortunately, probably with a bad experience or two along the line. The car looks and drives absolutely beautifully. I'm very happy with the work we've done on this car, as is the owner. Okay, it went way above the original budget because we discovered that the car was about to break in half and had to make some remedial action with that. The windows on these cars, the window mechanisms, it's a very thin steel wire, like the brake cable on a push bike, which operates the window. It goes up, down, up, and then the window works on two lengths of the cable. It's one cable that goes right round. The electrics on fiberglass cars, earthing is a problem because fiberglass is non-conductive, so you can't earth things to fiberglass. They have to be earthed to a nearest metal component that's attached to the chassis. Net result, the windows on these can be dreadfully slow. And somebody some years ago came, because you've got high resistance, long way for the electricity to earth, etc. Somebody came up with the bright idea some years ago, why don't we put relays into the window mechanism so that the motor has a good chance of actually working the windows up and down. And this, he says, forgetting to turn the ignition on, this is by Italian by Italian window standards from the 1960s and 70s. That is positively race specification. I mean, it's a bit disconcerting whenever the mechanism works, because you can hear the cable sort of going as it goes up and down, as though the thing's about to self-destruct, but them's the way it was designed. This car it's an absolute peach of a car. It's got bigger wheels than it would have had. There were 3 or 4 optional extras on 308 GTBs when they came out. This has got the optional deep front spoiler, and it has had from new. You could get wide wheels on them. These are larger diameter wheels, but you could get wide wheels as an option, air conditioning, and I think metallic paint, and what was called a sports exhaust. Extraordinary, strange cul-de-sac for Ferrari to go down with this car. But the Dinos, all the Ferraris of the 60s and 70s up to this time had the 2 twin outlet exhaust system, the 4 exhausts, 2 either side, which were part of Ferrari's trademark. 275, Daytona, Dino, all this. And then the standard exhaust on this was one single tailpipe let into the rear valance under the back of the car with a semicircular bite out of the valance for the single exhaust pipe to fit into. And then as an optional extra, you could specify a sports exhaust, which simply reset the exhaust back to what the others had been up to then. Very strange. I don't know why Ferrari did it. Maybe they decided it was an extra profit center to have people spec up the sports exhaust and pay extra for it. I know not why, but this car has got the original standard single exhaust on it. These days, if you want a fast car or a faster car, you buy a more modern car. If you want something that is of its time and in period with 255 brake horsepower, you stick with this and its original exhaust system. It's not about being the fastest car in the world, but this is a delight. It really is. I'm super happy with the way this car's turned out. We've managed to rejuvenate the original Connolly VM8500 black leather. The whole thing is really a very, very pleasing package. Even the registration number, he managed to bag the UK registration 308 GTB. That is the right number for the car. So yeah, car, I'm very happy to talk about this, the Ferrari 308 GTB. So what I'm going to do is, I'm just going to talk about the engine and gearbox a little bit. They have this very clever little system here, which is quite foolproof. You know, even if the wind's blowing, that's not going to dislodge and fall down. Nice, clever thing. Quite often these zips are broken. This is the main luggage compartment at the back here. This one is still intact, and you've got quite a lot of room in there for soft bags. But this is the heart of the machine, as it should be. 90-degree V8, alloy block, alloy heads with cast iron liners. It's a very reliable and strong engine, this. Ferrari reduced the capacity of the engine for tax purposes in Italy because the fiscal rating, the tax rating went from 18 to 38% above 2 litres in Italy at the time. So Ferrari brought out a 208, which they eventually turbocharged, and it brought it up to the same power as this, but obviously the engine was more stressed. So it worked. It was very happy with that. It's a very, very strong engine. Of course, it went on to great things in the 288 GTO and the F40. The bottom end, I think, is largely the same. You've got 4 overhead cams, 2 per bank, inlet there with Weber carburetors in the middle there. 1 valve per cylinder, so it's 8 inlet valves and 8 exhaust valves. The exhaust valves are the dreaded sodium-cooled valves, which means the valve stem and the valve head are friction welded together. The stem is hollow, and it has a tiny shot of liquid sodium in there to transfer the heat from one end of the valve to the other, to aid with valve cooling, exhaust valve cooling. And the problem is the heads can actually break off, and that causes absolute havoc in the engine. I've said this before, but in times past, nowadays, we would submit the cylinder head to a very skilled repair company, of which there are quite a few in the UK. Not quite a few, a few. And they will actually repair badly damaged combustion chambers and cylinder heads and things like that. But I've had a few of these that are scrap over the years in the 80s and 90s because you just bought another head and put it on, simple as that. They're a very, very strong engine. The weak link, as I say, is the sodium-cooled exhaust valves. By now, almost every engine has been out. You can take this cylinder head off with the engine in situ, but you can't take that one off because it's right up against the bulkhead. Almost every one has had its sodium-cooled exhaust valves replaced by stainless steel ones. The one area that does have to be, if you are in the fortunate position of owning a GT4 or a GTB with this engine, crankcase breathing is something that has to be watched. Make sure that the crankcase breathers around the engine, which are easily identifiable in the workshop manual or the parts book, make sure they're all clean, flame traps, etc., so that the engine can breathe properly. Otherwise, what happens is it starts to blow oil seals on the camshafts or any other, heaven forbid, the crankshaft front seal or the rear main seal. But this is a lovely bit of kit. The engine is actually placed on top of the transmission. Doesn't help the centre of gravity, but it's all compact enough to be able to fit. Ferrari first brought this out on the Dino 206, the idea of the engine being sat on top of the gearbox and then a cluster of transfer gears down the side with the clutch. And it's a tried and tested system. They regularly upgraded the gearbox on the Dino 246 in particular to cope with strength and longevity and gear ratios and things like that. And by the time this came out, they'd pretty well nailed it. Actually, this gearbox is very reliable in this car. Just watch changing into second when cold, because the synchromesh doesn't like it and will wear out just like that if you push it too much. So driving from cold, start them up, warm them up stationary with the clutch out at about 1500 RPM to get the oil circulating, bit of heat percolating in the engine, and then initially when you drive the car, first to third gear, just to give it a chance the gearbox a chance to get warmed up. And again, oil technology has moved on so much since the early EP90 oil that was used in these gearboxes. We're now into GL5, as it's called, 75W90, far superior oil, and that helps the gearbox last a long time as well. These aren't a horrendously expensive car to run. If you want to have a Ferrari on a budget, you could do a lot worse than have one of these. It's all about buying the right car to start with, but provided the car's been well looked after, then really, and it's been driven sympathetically, and whoever owns the car drives it sympathetically, this car will reward them with good reliability. The cam belts are here, one per bank. It's very interesting, the change intervals on cam belts on these and other Ferraris is always a hot topic. When this car came out, Ferrari recommended that they were changed every 2 years because of, and I heard this straight from the Ferrari technical department. I used to communicate with them quite regularly. They had a technical support hotline, which was sort of for dealers only, but they used to speak to me. And I'm going back to the 1980s now. And they said it was ozone from the alternator windings that used to affect the cam belts, whether they were being used or not. And that was their reason for needing to be changed every 2 years. The thing is, this has got a fairly light flywheel. It's got 8 great big carburetors. It's got a free-flowing exhaust system. This engine picks up revs and drops down to idle very quickly, all of which puts pressure on the cam belts. It's the inertia of everything accelerating and slowing down very quickly. So 2 years, Ferrari said, you can stretch that now quite a lot. no pun intended. But I'm not going to give exact figures because I don't want anybody coming on the phone saying, my camshaft timing belts have just gone and it's all your fault. So yeah, look at the internet. But it's not the ordeal it used to be. You can actually get at these through the right-hand rear wheel arch. You can change the belts with the engine in situ, which is more than you can with the later Ferraris. So yeah, altogether, a good little motor, this one. Well, I'm as ever sympathetically warming the car up, which can be quite interesting on a Ferrari of this era because some of the instruments can be a bit dodgy. The oil pressure gauge, unlike earlier Ferraris, the early V12s, the oil pressure gauge on this is electric, as a lot of cars are, but the senders can become quite faulty on them, and you suddenly have alarmingly low oil pressure, never really high, always low. And for a number of years, the speedometer transducers on the differential, the actual sensor for the speedo, worked intermittently. So a lot of these cars, and I'm not saying this is one of them for any set moment whatsoever, but a lot of them actually have done a lot more miles than their speedometers or odometers would give them credit for, because you couldn't get them. For years, Ferrari would not supply a speedo transducer, so there are a lot of very low mileage comparatively 308s, that generation of Ferrari around. Quite amusing, really. And so the gauges don't always tell the truth, but this really is a beautiful car to drive. Actually, an example of this car. I mean, it tracks straight and true. It's absolutely perfect wheel geometry wise. The brakes feel okay. They will never feel wonderful on a car like this because the servo effect, I think on this car, the brake servo actually works between 2 and 2.5 multiplication. So if you apply 10 pounds pressure to the brake pedal, you get between 20 and 25 pounds pressure on the brake master cylinder. That's how a servo works. But these days, modern cars, manufacturers have gone very heavy on the brake servoing or boosting effect, so that you end up where you only almost have to look at the brake pedal and you end up going through the windscreen. But classic cars aren't like that. And now that the gearbox is warming up, that the whole power unit is warming up, it becomes a delight when it's hot. It really does. It's all just beautifully working together. The synchromesh is great. You can actually improve on the synchro on these and a lot of other cars of this era, Lamborghinis, Ferraris. It's to do with the thickness of the coating on the synchromesh rings. And if you actually buy them optimized, it can make make a massive difference to the actual effect of the smooth gear changes. I mean, that's going into second beautifully now it's hot. Here we go. But for a 50-year-old car, this car drives effortlessly, really. It's, as I said before, it's never going to be the fastest car in the world, but that sort of wasn't the point of it when it was new. It was meant to be a car that was very comfortable for covering large distances in, and it still is. There's quite a lot of room in the cabin comparatively. The Dino 246 had a bit more room than this, strangely enough. I suspect they had to move the rear bulkhead a bit further forward with that slightly bigger engine, 90-degree V8 instead of a 65-degree V6, slightly deeper front to back. But this is lovely. The gear change, you've got to push the clutch down all the way on these, otherwise they don't change gear properly. But the whole thing is warming up. The suspension, this car is used, which means that the suspension is supple, it's not seized, it's actually riding the road very well. All the T's and P's are up to spec now, temperatures and pressures. And the engine is, it's always funny. I mean, this was a very early version of the flat plane crank V8 or single plane crank V8. It was Cosworth really had the breakthrough moment with this, with their DFV engine, Formula One engine, which dominated Formula One for decades. And that was a flat crank or single plane crankshaft, so it didn't have that V8 burble. It was actually two 4-cylinder engines, acoustically and mechanically sharing a common crankshaft, whereas a V8, the firing pulses alternate diagonally from bank to bank, and that's why you get that V8 burble, because of the 90-degree intervals, journals on the V8 crank. So this is a whole different kettle of fish, and the for that reason it has been criticised as sounding like a bit like a 4-cylinder engine, because that's what it is. As I say, it's two 4-cylinder engines mated together. The reason why they did that is because from an acoustic point of view, from a breathing point of view, from a getting the charge in and out of the cylinders as efficiently as possible, particularly at high RPM, a flat plane crank or single plane crank is the way to go. It makes a big difference, but as I shall demonstrate in a moment, it's quite interesting because it transitions to at about 5,500 revs. It's redlined at 7,700. It actually the sound changes from an inline 4 type sound. It starts to take on a bit of a V8 snarl at about 5,500 revs. And we have a clear road, and we have a warmed up car. So should we see if the pudding is in the eating, as we say in Old Blighty? Right, so that's 3,500 revs. Yeah, there's that extra dimension to the sound that comes in. I'll just... Right, so that's 4,500, 5.5. There it is. The tone becomes more raw, it becomes more purposeful. It sort of becomes more V8ish, and this engine was what the Ferrari had, who owned Maserati at the time, did with the Thema 832, the Lancia Ferrari as it was called, the Thema Saloon, with a different version of this V8 engine in it. But what they did was actually they altered the crankshaft and the camshafts in this engine. That's all they had to do to make it into a twin plane crank, more conventional, like an old American small block Chevy or big whatever, Ford, Windsor or Cleveland V8. It staggered the intervals and you get that V8 burble, and they did that. They altered this engine to that specification for the Lancia Thema 832, 8 cylinders, 32 valves, and they did that because it's a luxury sedan, it's a luxury saloon, unlike this, which is a much more sporty car, and they decided it needed a more conventional sounding V8 with the torque of a twin plane crankshaft instead of the high screaming power delivery that this, for the time, developed. Yeah, it's very interesting because Ferrari had a formulaic, tried and tested method of the top end of the engine design. So in terms of camshaft profile and valve timing and power band, this is the same as a Dino 246 and a Ferrari Daytona. So these three Ferraris from this era all had the same valve clearances, the same power curve, and the same rev limit, because they were all designed to be. It worked. It came out in the Daytona, and they thought this is great because it gives low down torque. It's not a particularly lumpy power curve, so it's extremely linear in its delivery. There's no sudden, not like a 4-cam 275, which is a very exhilarating car to drive. But in those, the power comes in at 4,500 RPM. Boom, it's like a turbo popping in. This doesn't have that because of that linear power curve. We'll just try it again. Such a rewarding car to drive, this. It really is. Lots of lovely feedback through the steering wheel. It's just right, the level of feel from the road. I actually suspect those bigger wheels are probably helping with the feedback. The tyre technology wasn't really around in sort of second tier supercars in the 70s to take advantage of this. The gearbox is lovely, clickety-click, snickety-snick. This is a very, very good place to be. I love the fact that we've had the job satisfaction of doing this. Phenomenal. Well, that concludes another Tyrrell's Classic Workshop video. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back with something else very soon.